for talking about organizing, you know, that's a word that I associate with you, Aaron, organizing. So talk to us a little bit. What does that word mean, and you know, how is that applicable for some of these races that we're talking to people about?
Yeah, thanks. Well, yeah, I was an organizer before I was a campaign organizer. I loved, just organizing my family and friends into, various activities. I loved planning parties in high school, and I think that that is in essence, what organizing is. It's going out into the community and connecting with folks and bringing them together for a shared purpose. And in this case, the shared purpose is getting yourself elected. So when we think about organizing in the early stages of the campaign, that's very different from the later stages of the campaign. When we'll get into some of the field stuff, but initially organizing, fundraising is organizing, and we've just talked a lot about that. But certainly, you want to think about a few other buckets, and those buckets are volunteers and stakeholders and what I'm going to call affinity groups and councils or advisory boards. So when it comes to volunteers, I think the one thing that I see campaigns getting hung up with is, what do volunteers do in the earlier phases of the race where voter contact may not be as important? Because keep in mind, if you're reaching out to a voter, 6 months out from an election, whether that's sending them a mailer or knocking on their door or just kind of calling them up and trying to tell them about your race, that's a tough proposition because it's going to be hard for that voter to remember you 6 months later. So really, the kind of the prime time to start voter contact for a local race is going to be in that 3 month window, and certainly within the 1 month window of the campaign. So if you're outside of that window, you really want to be thinking about other things that your volunteers can do. One of the things that volunteers can do is help you fundraise. They can organize events for you. They can reach out to their networks. They can potentially help keep you organized during call time or even do some of the outreach themselves, although no one's going to ever be a better fundraiser than you. Um, they can help with, some of the creative aspects, particularly people who have talents, who
Mhm.
work in marketing, who, know how to send mass emails, who work in PR, who know how to, draft a good press release, right? Um, I would say for early volunteers, look at people who have those kinds of skill sets. And they can do policy research for you. They can draft up ideas about policies that you can implement as part of your campaign. And then they can do more organizing for you. They can go out and they can certainly, barring it really being voter contact where you're working off a list of registered voters, they can go out and talk to a lot of people in the community about you. And some of those people are going to be voters, so there are ancillary benefits there. But really, what they're doing is they're trying to recruit, more people to join your campaign and to be a volunteer. So those are, some of the things to think about as you're building your campaign early on. You want to be recruiting volunteers, but you also got to get creative about what you're giving them to do, and you want to keep them engaged. You don't want to just ask people if they're going to volunteer for your campaign and then not be able to give them something to do. So that there's a little bit of work there. So just think about that as you're balancing some of the other needs early on in your campaign, particularly fundraising and communications. I would say that the next piece, which is stakeholder outreach, um, is probably more important than volunteer outreach in the beginnings of the campaign. Although I wanted to hit volunteer outreach because you're going to start with people that are excited and want to volunteer for you, and you don't want to lose out on that enthusiasm either. Um, but when it comes to stakeholder outreach, this is really the people who are influential in your community, the people who matter to your race, the people whose opinion moves larger numbers of voters, right? So when we're thinking about stakeholders, we're thinking about reporters, we're thinking about online influencers, we're thinking about influential community members, elected officials, business leaders. So people who people in the community look up to, are looking, at who they're going to support, at looking are looking to what they say about the race. There are also lots of groups, local groups that endorse local candidates. So you want to think about the people who sit on the boards of those organizations as stakeholders as well. You want to ask them if they're, releasing an endorsement survey, so that for you to fill out as a candidate at some point, and you want to understand what that timeline is. So you want to be having those conversations. You don't want to be have your campaign in the initial stages operating in a silo where it's just you reaching out to donors and volunteers and potential supporters, without really seeking the support and the approval, and the feedback of the more important people in the community. Think about it as a pyramid, right? Maybe your stakeholders are at the top of the pyramid. They're a smaller group, but they're very valuable. Then in the middle, you have volunteers, donors, and other types of supporters. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you have your voters, which are really foundational. And you're thinking about the pyramid, the earlier you are, you really want to be thinking about those top two layers. And as you get further into the campaign, you want to be thinking about all the layers.
And you want to be trying to move people sort of up that pyramid or that chain or whatever as well, right? Once you've got somebody's support as a potential voter, you talk to someone who's really excited, the conversation doesn't end with, thanks, I'm really glad to have your support. It ends with the question.
Yes, certainly that's true. But I would just caution, don't take on more organizing than you have bandwidth to handle, in the early stages of the
Hmm.
campaign. So you don't need to be thinking about every positive conversation needs a follow up, right? Because then you're going to drive yourself crazy. You want to be having lots of conversations. You want to be collecting business cards. You want to build a database of people who you've talked to, of supporters of your campaign. This is a great task to get volunteers to help out with. And you want to keep good notes on, the conversations that you had, and the concerns that people have. But you don't want to do that to the detriment of, some of the other things that are really priority early on, like raising money. And so, what I would say is, of course, you want to think about that ladder of engagement. But more so, I would think about the ladder of engagement with a stakeholder or with a donor, right, as priority in the early stages. And with a stakeholder, you may never get a community leader or an elected official to agree to endorse your campaign. But certainly, if you're dissuading them from endorsing one of your opponents, or you're getting them to say good things about you to other stakeholders and other members of the community, you can view that as a win as well. And even that may take several conversations with that stakeholder to get to. So the stakeholders they're going to be a tougher pitch, but again, they're going to make you better because they're going to ask tougher questions, and they're going to give more valuable feedback.
And I would just second that. I mean, you might end up learning something, even if the person can't endorse you for some reason. Even getting their vote might be valuable, and you might learn something from them. They might be able to say, "Hey, you should check out this organization or that organization, or you should make sure to call so and so." They might be connectors into other places in the community. And really, when you're running, you want to make sure that you're leaving no stone unturned, as far as which groups you're able to talk to, so that you can ensure that you're getting a really representative sample of everybody who lives in the district that you're running in. So you really understand their needs, and you're not just talking to a really small group of people who don't kind of speak for everybody. And there's a lot of opportunities to meet people who can help teach you about something in the community that you might not have known otherwise. Um,
Totally, totally. And then the last group that I'll hit quickly is just the affinity groups or the councils slash advisory boards. Depending on where you're running, and what the size of your race is, there may be some very strong local interests in the community. Certainly there are some that are going to be constants, like there's always going to be a high school. There's always going to be young people. And so, you may want to bring a group of young supporters together and say, "This is my youth council," and convene those people regularly. But you may be able to get creative with it if you're in a rural area in a rural county. You may want to bring the sportsmen together, and have your sportsman uh, council, and that's good too. I mean, don't just think about having it be have to be very policy oriented. You can have fun with it. If you're a teacher, maybe you want to have a teachers advisory group. If you're a tech entrepreneur, maybe you want to have a group of tech entrepreneur advisors, and so on and so forth. But think about a few groups that you can bring together, that are going to help with fundraising, that are going to help with content and policy, that you can convene once a month, to give you feedback. And these are people that you can, really anchor around a common belief, interest, or purpose, and get them to do things for your campaign. And this is also something that you can publicize on social media that you're doing, or talk about on your website. And it looks good. I mean, people want to, particularly if it's an influential group like teachers or doctors. People want to know that you're getting advice from experts, and that you're working with experts on your campaign.
And it'll also be fun for those people because they get to be part of the campaign.
Absolutely, it creates community, and that sense of community and camaraderie is something that is going to pay dividends, particularly later in the campaign when you're asking people to, pull late nights, phone banking, and come in on the weekends to knock on doors.
That's great. So we've covered some really good stuff here, really about identifying some of the different groups that are going to be part of your campaign, from the volunteers who might help with raising money or organizing events, to additional stakeholders in your community, including community leaders, local neighborhood associations, and other groups that not only might you be able to pick up endorsements from or things like that, but you might be able to kind of use as conduits to others in the community, and then setting up some of those groups, bringing those people, that last point, bringing those people, bless you, into the campaign, and making sure that you are pulling in from some of those areas, especially any that you might be connected to, and leveraging that as part of the campaign. So before we move on to talking about field, is there anything else you wanted to, any last thoughts on kind of the organizing and stakeholders?
No,
Cool.